Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Mind, Money, Motion podcast. And we're continuing our discussion around the topic of financial literacy. I actually have a financial education officer joining me today as my guest, Tony Steuer, best-selling author, host of the Tony Steuer podcast, and the Females in Finance Meet the Author show, speaker, contributor to Ford's, and financial literacy thought leader all around. Welcome, Tony, and thanks so much for being with me today.
Thanks, Marie, for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
I think the two of us have our hearts aligned because your goal is really to empower people to make smart money choices. And you do that by providing education as well as the resources that you know is going to help them make a dramatic impact in their financial life. So that's my personal passion as well. And so I appreciate and thank you for all you're doing. I'm curious how you got to, I understand you have some insurance background. We've all kind of evolved from where we came from to where we are today in financial literacy. But I'm curious what your history and story is that got you here today.
Well, I started out as an insurance salesperson, and within a few years, I noticed somebody who had this interesting title I'd never seen, a life and disability insurance analyst. And so I looked into that, and it was fee-based insurance consulting. And I found that I really liked consulting. What I did was I reviewed people's insurance policies and wrote analysis papers and recommendations rather than actually sales work. And I found that it was really interesting to help people understand what they had purchased. And that was my first exposure to the fact that people oftentimes buy financial service products that they don't understand, but yet they can be paying a lot of money for. So then I started doing some writing, and that led to writing my first book, which is a thrilling book. It's questions and answers on life insurance. And
bedtime reading, okay.
Exactly, bedtime reading. The plot's a little, actually, I got a 1-star rating on Amazon. Somebody bought it and called it boring. That was a little surprising. Well, a reference book on life insurance, I'm not sure what the expectation was. So despite that, I continued to write, and I found that I really was getting more interested in the general financial education, that there was still a struggle for people to get a general comprehension, basically to get started on their financial life. And for me, the part that became really interesting is that it seemed to me that a lot of it stemmed from even before you get into the conversation about saving, compounding interest, that people even need to go a little bit further than that and to really think about being organized, to thinking about how they approach money. So that's where I'm today. Is I have had you on my podcast, and it was fantastic having you as a guest. Is talking to people and trying to help see how we can change that money conversation, because I think that until you can change that money mindset, is you can't go any further with people. And that's where I am today.
That is true. The mindset is really what triggers the behavior and the action, or the lack of, right? So how have you found yourself evolving to kind of a financial philosophy? We all kind of settle on some key things that we think are really important to get people started and moving forward with their financial life.
Well, I think it's that old saying, knowledge and power go together, that the more you know, the more powerful you are. So of course it starts with education, but it also starts for me with education and context, and providing education for people when they want it and how they want to access it, is breaking it down into a way that people can identify with it. In my most recent 2 books, is I used a lot of first aid analogies, building a first aid kit, stocking it with medical supplies is something that people could relate to. Whereas in the financial services industry, we've been really good at coming up with, unapproachable jargon that even people in the industry sometimes struggle to understand the terms that are used. So, I'm trying to make the insurance education and financial education relatable to people.
That's really huge because the whole lingo aspect, every profession I understand, whether it's medical or financial or engineering or pick one, they all have their own little lingo that unless you're in that industry, you don't always totally comprehend or familiar with. So I think the education aspect of trying to translate, I know when I came from originally from the health and wellness industry as a registered dietitian. So I felt like I was a translator of dietary instructions to daily eating and exercise habits. And the same thing now with finances. People really usually just want you to cut to the chase and tell them what they need to do, as long as they, understand the background or the knowledge piece, like you said. So that's probably really your focus on your latest book, I would imagine, the Get Ready monthly personal finance guidebook.
Yeah, and that's it, to get people to take action, but to take informed action so that they can control their financial choices rather than letting money control their lives. Is the principles behind the Get Ready philosophy are, setting goals, educate yourself, keep on track, think about expenses, and then A is for analyze, is so that people are really thinking about, okay, how does this work for me, rather than taking a look at a product and saying, okay, there's a mutual fund, is this mutual fund any good or not? Well, that's not really, to me, the right question. The right question is, do I need a mutual fund? And that's been the disconnect between the financial service industry quite often, is the sale of products rather than the sale of solutions for what people are looking for to solve their problems and to help make their lives easier to address an issue that they have.
Right. I'm curious if there was a triggering event or story or situation that kind of was your inspiration to go ahead and write this book. I know I've written several little itty bitty books. They're just checklist books because I think all in 1 week, I had family, friends, clients, workshops, all asking me very similar types of questions. And that's when I finally said, this checklist that I have used internally with clients, I need to share that because this is a common series of questions and lack of activity and actions that people just need to know more about. So I'm curious if you had kind of a motivating moment that really brought you to, oh my goodness, I need to write this workbook.
Well, yes and no. So the workbook, and I think actually you phrased it really well. It's a culmination of my career and everything I've learned. However, yeah, I guess the thing that really spurred it into action was the death of my mother and the fact that her financial affairs were not organized. And I layered on top of that I had been messing around with the concept for a long time. The book was sort of half written. It was as a concept that I thought people needed it. But that was definitely the trigger that got me to do it, is, looking through and being her executor and noticing that stuff was not together and it was not coherent. And it was really challenging to have to piece everything together.
I think that's a very common thread that many, many people can identify with and relate to as far as what they've experienced. And so I would imagine one unique aspect of your book is that it really is a guide to kind of step by step help them take the overwhelm out of, okay, how do I prevent this in my own family kind of thing.
100%. And I think that's the biggest thing that people face is, well, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, is that sense of overwhelm. And what I wanted to do, and it's even in the title of the Get Ready Planner, is it's step-by-step planner for maintaining your financial first aid kit. is that I think it's easier, and that's why I love your concept of checklists. And yeah, my latest book also uses checklists as well, is because it's an easy way for people to kind of go through it, to think about each step, and then to process it. And I was inspired by Marie Kondo.
Mm.
Um, with the whole concept of taking a look at something. Now, you're not going to look at a financial service product and go, oh boy, this mutual fund brings me joy.
Yeah,
But it is that same principle of looking at each thing and then evaluating whether it makes sense for your financial life. But getting to, you know, I can't remember the word she uses, but getting to spend a few minutes with it to think about it and go, okay, do I know what this is? Do I know where it fits in my financial life? And does it still fit in my financial life? And that's also a question that the financial services industry doesn't do a very good job with, is coming back 2 years later and saying to the client, well, yeah, is this still making sense for you? Maybe we should adjust this. And that doesn't happen as often as it should.
well, and I like the concept of, it's like your book title says, get ready. And so we're trying to help folks prevent stress and cost and tax and mistakes. So who wouldn't be interested in that? And yet it's still who likes to think about, when I'm a time when I or a family member in the hospital or gone. But if we try to take what I've found, take the emotion out of it, and I think you do that too by calling yours a get ready toolkit. This is just a fact of life that you need to take care of, and you can, during the calm before the storm, make things so much more peaceful by taking some action now.
Exactly. Well, there's a great quote I use in the book, and that it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark.
Yes, that is a
So,
great quote.
and that's really what this is, emergency planning is about taking that time, as you said, before something happens, to make the plan. The other thing with Get Ready is that I want people to consider, that you can use this for other things, that it's not necessarily about death, that being organized financially and on top of your financial life, you can be prepared for many things that
Right.
happen. You can be prepared for when you're taking out a mortgage. You can be prepared for retirement. You name it, is the more time you take to prepare. For example, I know a woman who wrote a book about credit scores, is that if you can keep your credit score above 800, you can save money on a lot of different things. You're going to get a lower loan rate and everything else. So, that whole part about getting ready is, yeah, of course, it's for if something happens to you, but it's also, it can improve your financial life as today and tomorrow.
You are so right, because we do better when we have this foundation of knowing what we have and having everything in place. And I know you talk a little bit about a calendar. We're kind of used to using a calendar or a checklist for a variety of reasons. So a financial calendar seems like a great idea.
Yeah, and I have to say, I was inspired when I looked at your website, and that's when I reached out to you, is because I noticed that you've used that concept as well.
Mm-hmm.
It is, what I love about the concept is that it helps people go through all areas of their financial life to make sure that they don't forget to review something. And, as you and I talked about, there's many things that fall through the cracks or don't get reviewed. So
Mm-hmm.
in the financial calendar, for example, 1 month is review your beneficiaries and estate planning. So
Huge.
during that month, it's like, okay, well, did you have a life event where you need to change the beneficiary on your 401k? That's something people forget about. They may change the beneficiary on their life insurance plan, but do they change it on their retirement plans or the other places? And that's a very micro um, event, but there are so many of those things that go on through the year that may not get reviewed by a financial planner. They may fall in the cracks between different advisors, where the financial planner thinks the insurance agent is taking care of it, the insurance agent thinks it's own, the estate planning attorney is taking care of it, and it falls through the cracks. So what I was trying to do is find a way to take, again, that really high level overview for people to help them out to say, okay, well, this is the time where I need to reach out to my financial planner to talk about this. And to, in between my, review appointments with my financial planner. So that's where I was trying to go with the financial planners, to help people keep that, 1,000-degree view, and then keep everything up to date and try not to let anything fall through the cracks.
That's wonderful, Tony, because your website has each month of the calendar year and kind of one theme. So to do, I know mine is similar. It's got, a little breakdown of 3 different things to think about doing each month. But the point is, it's something concrete. It's something, like you said, that so often I think people think, beneficiary designations. Of course, I set that up when I open the account, and then they don't think twice about it. But you and I both know more and more sad stories every year in families that we're talking to. And that one little piece of paper, that beneficiary form that wasn't updated or corrected when life changed, can make a world of difference, both good and bad, for sometimes the wrong people.
Yeah, it's always perspective, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, all of these areas that we're talking about, I run into a lot of feedback from audiences, and they're usually feeling guilty that they just don't know what they wish they would know. And then, of course, we know that they don't know what they don't know either, which is another reason your calendar is so helpful, because it goes way beyond, yes, I have a will and beneficiary designations, and yes, I have investment accounts, but there's so much more to your financial life than that. But the whole recognition of, I try to help people ease their guilt a little bit, to recognize that our country really doesn't have it all together yet. I'm hoping that the whole financial literacy side of education becomes more and more required and implemented in our school systems, in our work sites, in our communities. We have needs throughout our life. And so I'm curious, in your work with your past insurance and your current book and website, and now as the financial education officer at Paperwork, I'm curious where you are seeing how financial literacy could be improved, should be improved, or maybe is being improved with what you're involved with.
Well, I think you hit it very well. Is we have to, one of the things is, people have their own money stories, and sometimes there's a lot of money shaming in this country, or, just human nature, where somebody doesn't want to say that they don't know something. You don't want to be the person in the conversation who says, I don't know that, when everybody makes it seem like you should know something. So I want to take it a step back, where somebody says, just refresh me on what a checking account is. Because all of us have had checking accounts, me for a really, really long time. And, but, I'm in the financial services industry, so I know what a checking account is. But if I wasn't, would I have remembered what a checking account was when I opened it up 40 or 50 years ago? Probably not. So, I take people through, and we're doing this in Paperwork, the app, that we ask people about certain documents, but we educate them a little bit about the document, why it's important, and what they should know about it, maybe a tip. And that's what I do in the planner as well, is I say, okay, so you're going to keep track of your checking account. This is what a checking account is. Here's something you should know about checking accounts. And then you go for it. But it's giving people, either it's a refresher for those who at one point knew, or it's new information for those who didn't know the question. And you mentioned it earlier, is the big thing with financial education is people don't know what they don't know. So oftentimes they can't even ask the question because they don't know the question to ask. So I want to help people to know what questions they want to ask before it's time to ask them.
Great. So let's kind of wrap up with that whole, I always like my listeners to take away 1 or 2 or even 3 nuggets of, oh, I should do that, or, oh, I should add that to my checklist, or, oh, that applies to me, I'm going to look into that. So if you had to throw out a tip or two on what you hear a lot of maybe common misconceptions, or your favorite financial tip for folks to maybe think about checking or acting on if they haven't already.
Well, I have a lot of tips. I could talk
Yeah,
for 2 hours about my.
a couple books full, right?
I have lots of tips. My number one tip is always be educated. And along with that, ask questions. That's also a good way, one, of course, to learn something, but also to, suss out financial fraud. I've done a lot of regulatory and litigation consulting, and oftentimes people who don't have your best interest at heart are going to be the ones who don't want to answer your questions directly, or they kind of slide your questions off. So asking questions does two things. It helps you learn something, and it helps protect yourself and to not be a victim of financial predators. So the other thing is that it's okay, and again, maybe this is also education, it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to start at the beginning. I always advocate for people to keep it simple. With my own investments, I have a finance major with a emphasis in investments, but the majority of my investments are in exchange traded funds. I keep it simple. I follow that rule for myself, and I recommend that to other people. If you want to get super sophisticated and super complex, that's okay. That's a choice that we can all make, but it's still okay to keep things vanilla, easy to understand in your financial life. You have to make the choice for what works for you. And I think that's probably my last tip is it is your financial life. It's the financial services and products that are best going to help you meet your goals.
Awesome. Great, great advice. So you have numerous resources and are always offering more in the way of podcasts, books, etc. So where can our listeners learn more about all of that and you, and get some more financial education?
Well, the best place to reach out is at tonysteuer.com. And I am also on LinkedIn, and I invite people to connect with me on LinkedIn. We're going to be doing more at Paperwork. Also, I'm starting to get active on Instagram, and so I'll be posting more to Instagram, and that's a great place to have a little bit of a conversation. But LinkedIn, always on LinkedIn.
Awesome, awesome. And we'll put your website. I know I always have to think twice. Your last name is Steuer, Steuer. And we'll have those links in our show notes as well. So thank you, Tony, for all you're doing in the financial arena. It's a life skill, and the more we can help people with this life skill, the more they can really focus on other things that they're passionate about doing in the world. So it's all leading to a good end.
Well, fantastic, Marie. Thank you so much for having me today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.